Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the Presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Calvin Coolidge, and the focus is from Plymouth to Amherst. The Coolidges arrived very early in North American soil, following John Winthrop and the Pilgrims to what became the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They came over in the 1630s with Puritan background, settled just outside of Boston in a town called Watertown. Coolidge's great-great-grandfather was among those who took up arms against the British, actually showing up at Lexington, the Battle of Lexington at the very beginning of the Revolutionary War. And after independence was finally secured from the British, the Coolidges spread out a little bit, but mostly still in that New England area, some of which settled in Saltash, Vermont, a town that would later be called Plymouth. In the middle of the 19th century now, we move forward to this still tiny little community in Plymouth, just a handful of farmers. The nearest train was still a dozen miles away in the town of Ludlow. Puritan stock here through and through. Self-reliant folks, honest, independent, frugal. That was the makeup of the folks of Plymouth and Plymouth Notch, which was an unincorporated area where John Coolidge really settled in. Now, John Coolidge, a farmer, also a jack of all trades. He was at times a constable, a notary public. He was a postmaster. He ran the local store, which earned him about $100 a month in profit to go with whatever he could produce on the farm. And in 1868, John Coolidge got married to Victoria Moor. They were both in their early 20s. Pretty soon, they brought their first child into the world, a boy. They named him after the father, John Calvin Coolidge, although he always went by the name Calvin, born on the nation's birthday, July 4th, 1872, in the back room of a 1.5-story cottage that was attached to the family store. For Calvin Coolidge, he never forgot his Vermont roots. "Vermont is my birthright," he wrote. "Here one gets close to nature, in the mountains, in the brooks, the waters of which hurry to the sea, in the lakes shining like silver in their green setting, fields tilled not by machinery, but by the brain and the hand of man. My folks are happy and contented. They belong to themselves, live within their income, and fear no man." Very much the description of Calvin Coolidge and his parents. Again, his father ran the farm, had jobs around the community, also served in the state legislature, so a bit of a political background. Coolidge's mother, her job, raised the children. And again, a second child came along, a girl named Abbie, in 1875. Victoria Coolidge would use the Bible to teach the kids to read. Calvin Coolidge adored his mother, but it was his father that he always wanted to impress. He later said, "My father had qualities that were greater than any I possess. He was a man of untiring industry, great tenacity of purpose. I cannot recall that I ever knew of his doing a wrong thing. He would be classed as decidedly a man of character." This was the man that Calvin Coolidge wanted to emulate and impress pretty much his entire life. Now, life on the farm in Vermont, hard work every day out in the fields. Calvin Coolidge would feed the animals, milk the cows, shear the sheep, be involved in the spring planting, whatever odd jobs needed to be done. That was part of his youth. That included extracting sap from the maple trees. Coolidge's made maple syrup, about 800 to 2,000 pounds a year they would sell as a product from their farm. As for an education, Calvin Coolidge started early. Age of 5, he went to the local schoolhouse, which was a school of 23 students, ages 5 to 18. This is where we first learn about Coolidge's shyness. He was not social, never engaged in chit-chat very much. In fact, the word to become used to describe Calvin Coolidge was taciturn. He just was not a talkative boy or young man or as an adult. Politics, he got an exposure to that at an early age as well. In fact, it was pure democracy in the form of the town meeting where the local community would come together, whatever the topics were, they would vote, basically direct democracy. Coolidge would go and he would listen, he would learn, also make a couple of bucks. Like his father, he would go and sell apples and popcorn at the town meeting. Now, for Calvin Coolidge, he had his biggest heartbreak in 1885. His mother, on her 39th birthday, died. She had been suffering from tuberculosis, had become somewhat of an invalid. A great loss to Calvin Coolidge. He was only 12 years old at the time when he said, "The greatest grief that came to a boy came to me. Life was never to seem the same again." He would certainly miss his mother. It was also time for him to move away. Just a little over a year later, time to further that education, which remained important to the Coolidges. He was enrolled at the Black River Academy in that nearby town of Ludlow, Vermont. Both of his parents had spent some time at Black River. It was his generation, his turn. Now, it was a boarding school without dorms, so they would stay in local families' homes. It was a tough transition. He was often homesick, and Coolidge, again, really not making a lot of friends because he was so innately shy. Herbert Moore was a colleague at the Black River Academy, and he said Cal was always a student. He didn't play ball or skate, nor did he hunt, swim, fish, or go in for any sports, except that he walked a great deal. When he was in the academy, he went to the public library every day. I think he read every book in it. He was a serious student, but again, difficulty making relationships and finding friends, as he was so quiet. Now, his father would actually bring Coolidge home for the weekends. He would make that 12-mile journey in his horse and buggy, pick up Coolidge, bring him home for the weekend, and then bring him back. And over time, he would bring Abbie as well. Abbie also enrolled at the Black River Academy, but her enrollment came to an end when her life came to a sudden end. It was another tragedy in the youth of Calvin Coolidge, because Abbie had a stomach pains. It turned out to be appendicitis, but this would be diagnosed after she actually already passed. She died just shy of her 15th birthday. Coolidge, working through this grief, went back to the Black River Academy. About a month later, he sent a note home to his father in his own simple terms: "It is lonesome here without Abbie." So he'd lost his mom, he'd lost his sister, but he was still moving forward in his academics. He graduated from the Black River Academy. At the commencement, he gave a speech called Oratory in History. His principal was George Sherman, and Sherman was relatively new to the Black River Academy, and he saw something in Coolidge. He thought Coolidge should go to college. In fact, he thought he should go to his alma mater at Amherst in Massachusetts, about 100 miles away. Well, Coolidge and his father talked it over, and he agreed. Let's try, go for those entrance exams at Amherst, but he was not feeling well when he took those exams, and he did not pass. So he had to spend an extra several months at the St. Johnsbury Academy in Vermont to gain a certificate that would give him permission to enter Amherst without taking any entrance exams again. Now, he did settle in at Amherst, but he was very much a fish out of water. He was reserved and quiet, not social. The societies, the fraternities at Amherst were a big deal. About 80% of the student population were involved in one of these fraternities. Coolidge wanted to be, but he was not welcomed in. He was just too shy, and no offers came his way. One of his fellow classmates described him as a drabber, more colorless boy I never knew than Calvin Coolidge when he came to Amherst. He was a perfect enigma to us all. He attended class regularly, but did not show any very great interest. He was by himself, no hobbies, no sports. Basically, he studied, spent time by himself. In the meantime, Coolidge's father remarried. Carrie Brown was her name, a school teacher several years younger than he was. Coolidge welcomed her into the family, in fact, became a pen pal. They had a writing correspondence throughout much of their lives together. She was very supportive, but it was still his father that he yearned to get the most recognition from, and he also needed something else from his father. He needed money because he didn't have any way of making any money. He was very frugal, but he did ask on occasion for his father, and his father typically came through with some cash here and there. Again, the descriptions of Coolidge in his days at Amherst largely unremarkable. In fact, his grades were unremarkable, his personality unremarkable. Mr. Hardy would later say that he was just the same kind of boy that I have known him as a man. Quiet, faithful, studious, dependable, doing the day's work, doing it well, staying on the job until it was done. Probably no one thought he would become president of the United States, but we knew him best that he was the stuff out of which great men are made. But again, not a great impression, just in fact, very little impression made on his colleagues at Amherst. Now, things began to change a little bit in his junior year because he got involved in debate. And here he was well prepared. He would speak, but he would speak based on that preparation. It was about the only time he spoke very much. There were two courses at Amherst that really made an impression on Calvin Coolidge. And the first was one taught by Anson Morse. This was a history and politics class. The emphasis was on good citizenship and good government. But the class that really made an impact on Calvin Coolidge, and frankly most of the students at Amherst in these days, was the one taught by Charles Garman, who spanned the last year and a half of your time at Amherst, and he focused on a combination of philosophy and psychology and politics and ethics. Now, he challenged his students to question everything, use logic and reason to find the truth, but in the context of religious teachings. The importance of the individual over groups was critical to Garman. That power of the independent thinker, and most importantly, service to humanity. That was the ultimate righteous cause, as Garman taught it to his students. And as Coolidge would later write, in ethics, he taught us there is a standard of righteousness that might does not make right. The end does not justify the means, and expediency as a working principle is bound to fail. The only hope of perfecting human relationships is in accordance with the law of service, under which men are not so solicitous about what they shall get as what they shall give. Like many of his classmates, Coolidge was mesmerized by Charles Garman. He basically said, we looked upon Garman as a man who walked with God, a strong influence on his life. Coolidge throughout his life would typically carry or have two books at his bedside, the Bible and the Life and Letters of Charles E. Garman. Coolidge's senior year at Amherst, he finally started to get some recognition. He won the J. Wesley Prize for Public Debate. He also entered a national essay contest sponsored by the Sons of the American Revolution. His title was The Principles Fought For in the American Revolution. He won first prize in the Amherst competition, and then he won the gold prize in the national competition. Came with a $150 stipend as an award. But he didn't go around bragging. In fact, the only way anybody knew that he won this is they read about it in the newspaper. He didn't think anybody would want to know, so he didn't bother telling anyone, including his father, who also learned about it from the press. Now, Coolidge in his senior year did get admitted to a fraternity finally, and it was a bit fortunate because a new house came on campus, the Phi Gamma Deltas. They needed some people to populate that house. Well, he didn't live there, but he did join, and he was involved with making some friends, but he was not a part of sort of the late night revelry that typically would come along with fraternity life. But he did bond with his fraternity mates, and in fact would owe some allegiance to them. Later, when he passed the bar, he would come back and give some pro bono legal help for the folks at Phi Gamma Delta at Amherst. He also was voted to give the Grove Oration on class day, just before commencement. It was a pretty big honor, the Grove Oration, but it was a bit of an odd mix with Coolidge because the purpose of the Grove Oration was witty put-downs, inside jokes. Well, he did fine in this particular case, but it wasn't really a style he cared for. And frankly, later would basically disdain. He would never take that way when going on the stump in running for public office. Calvin Coolidge graduated from Amherst 1895, just shy of his 23rd birthday. Again, what did others think of him? One more reflection. Harlan Stone would go on to become his Attorney General and later a Supreme Court Justice and even Chief Justice of the United States. He was a year behind Coolidge at Amherst, and here's what he said. I doubt if many of his fellow students were intimate with him. His extreme reticence made that difficult. To those who knew him casually, he seemed odd or queer, but it only required a slight acquaintance to appreciate his quiet dignity and the self-respect which commanded the respect of others. He was silent, he was quirky. He did make somewhat of an impression, though, for his hard work. He now had an education, a graduate from Amherst. What was he going to do next? Go back to tiny Plymouth in Vermont? Maybe stay in Massachusetts? He decided to pursue the law, but those are stories for another day. That's Calvin Coolidge, and from Plymouth to Amherst, from the life of Calvin Coolidge. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.